The Tsar of all of the Russias had outside his biggest, grandest, most impressive and opulent of palaces a garden. And within this garden there was a walled-off area, a garden within a garden. And in this garden within a garden there grew an apple tree. Now, not just any old apple tree, for this was the Tsar of all the Russias, and he never had just any old anything, let alone an apple tree. This was a golden apple tree. Now, by this I don't mean that the apples upon this tree had bright yellow skin or anything as simple as that. No, rather the apples, the fruit upon this tree were actual solid gold, completely inedible. But let's face it, if you're the Tsar of all the Russias, you're not bothered about eating golden apples, are you? You've got plenty of other things to eat. This was the source of his wealth, of his power, of his might, of his majesty, the pride of all the Russias, the golden apple tree, and the envy of all of the aristocrats, not only in Russia itself, but in the surrounding lands, such that the wall around this walled garden was remarkably high, with great metal spikes all along it, and guard dogs patrolling the perimeter, and heavily armed soldiers. But despite all of that, come the winter solstice, an apple went missing, because the Tsar and the Tsar's private gardener knew exactly how many fruit grew upon that tree, because they were solid gold. And they counted them each morning, and so they knew the morning after the solstice there was one missing. And a terrible furore set in. They questioned all of the guards that were on patrol that night. No one had heard anything. Despite the floggings, they still didn't hear anything. They investigated for footprints in the soft soil around the tree. Nothing. They sent for the Russian version of Hercule Poirot, and he could find nothing. There was nothing to find. And the next night, another apple disappeared, and the next, and the next. And despite beheading several of the guards to set an example to the others, still the apples went on missing, until on the sixth night, the Tsar said to himself, these guards are beyond useless. I must take additional measures. And so he summoned his 3 sons, and he said to them, you become the guards upon the apple tree. You sit in the garden, not outside the wall, but in the garden itself. And you watch and you watch and you watch all night long. And you see who is stealing these apples, and you catch them if you can. And even if you can't, at least if we know who's doing it, we are a step closer to stopping them from doing it. And so the 3 sons set up all night long. And the 2 eldest of the sons fell heavily asleep within minutes, for they had been used to pampered lives and soft cushions, and were not used to sitting up in the freezing cold all night long at midwinter, shivering and shaking beneath blankets, even with their furriest hats and furriest coats around them. They were creatures of luxury and indolence. This was, well, too much like hard work. But the youngest son, Ivan Tsarevitch, he stayed awake all night, matchsticks propping open his eyes, for the Tsar had promised whichever of his sons caught the thief, he would receive half the kingdom. Now, the remainder of the kingdom would be divided between the other 2 when the Tsar's time came to go and meet his ancestors. And that was a prize worth having. And certainly a youngest son had no such aspirations in the normal way of things, but now there was this golden opportunity. And so he waited and he waited and he waited to see who came for the golden apples. And in the darkest hours of the night, it seemed as if the dawn was breaking early, for a golden presence came from the east, flew into the garden and settled upon the branches of the apple tree. And as Ivan Tsarevitch watched, he saw a bird, a magnificent, wondrous bird, with feathers of gold so bright, so intense, they glowed with their own inner light. And the bird reached out a great claw and plucked one of the remaining apples upon the tree and began to peck at it, eating the solid gold in it, well, as no human ever possibly could. And having eaten half the apple, the bird took to the wing and flew off. Now, up till now, Ivan Tsarevitch had been sitting there open-jawed in wonder, watching this magnificent and beautiful bird. And it was only as the bird was taking to the air that Ivan remembered he was meant to be stopping the bird from stealing the fruit. And so he rushed across the tree, and he climbed up as quickly as he could, and he reached out to try and grab the bird, and all he caught was a tail feather, and it plucked and came out, this golden tail feather, and the bird was gone, off to wherever it had come from. Well, come the dawn, the father stomped down to the garden and demanded to know how many apples were left upon the tree. And the gardener counted them and said, "Sire, there is one missing." And to the eldest son he said, "Did you see the thief?" And the son blustered and ummed and ahed and came up with unconvincing excuses. And to the middle son he said exactly the same thing, and got more bluster and umming and ahhing and pathetic excuses. And he was just about to storm from the garden in a fury, when the youngest son, Ivan, said, "Father, I saw the thief." And the older two scoffed and laughed. "You saw nothing, you silly little twit. What did you see?" And from inside his coat, Ivan produced the golden feather, which, in the light of the early dawn, glowed with a brightness reminiscent of summer, not the depths of winter. And father and the two eldest brothers in the old garden stood, and for a moment there was silence as they watched, slack-jawed in wonder, this magnificent feather, this glowing, wondrous thing. "Well, well, well," said the father after finding his voice again. "You did see something, clearly you saw something, tell me what you saw." And so Ivan described the bird coming down and eating the solid gold apple and then flying off again with the remains of the thing and the direction in which it had flown. And he said, Father, let me ride after this bird. Other people must have seen, yes, it is long gone by now, but other people must have seen it in its passage, and I can head in the general direction, and surely I will come across it and find it." The elder two brothers said, "Yes, absolutely, our brother deserves to go and chase after this flying bird and find out whatever strange, mysterious place it's gone to," thinking to themselves, of course, the snotty little twit will never come back. And that would be one less rival claimed upon the throne of all the Russias. And at length the father, thinking, well, if his youngest son did not come back, at least he had the heir and the spare to take over the throne in due course, agreed his youngest son could take one of the best horses from the stable and ride off in the general direction of the golden bird, the fiery, magnificent bird. And so that is exactly what happened. Mile after mile after mile, Ivan Tsarevitch rode. And every so often he would come across some peasant, a farmer, a tradesman, a merchant, and he would stop and he would say to them, "Have you seen this wonderful fiery golden bird flying?" And most of them had no idea what he was on about. But every so often there would be some housewife, some peasant, some farmer, somebody who would say, "Well, yes, I did see a golden light going. It was too far off to see if it was a bird or not, but I saw it and it was going in that direction." And so Tsarevitch was steered closer and closer and closer into the right direction, until at length he came to the great forests of Siberia. And there, in the forests of Siberia, where the trees grow denser and darker and wilder and more dangerous than any tree grows in the rest of Russia, it came to a point where the horse was exhausted, the poor thing. And, truth be told, Ivan Tsarevitch himself was exhausted, all that riding and interrogating of peasants. And so he said to the horse, "Let us both take a break." He dismounted the horse, tied the reins to a tree branch, gave some of the hay he had brought with him to the horse, and sat down to eat his own lunch that he had brought with him from the kitchens. And he was so distracted, so tired, that he began to nod off after a few bites. And it was only the terrified whinnying of the horse that woke him up, and startled he looked around, and there, upon the back of the horse, bearing the poor creature to the ground, blood gouting everywhere, was the most enormous iron grey wolf, ripping great gouts out of that poor benighted horse, which soon whinnied its last and died. And the wolf, one yellow eye capped upon Tsarevitch, the other upon the source of its dinner, ate and ate and ate, until you would have thought it could eat no more, but wolves do not wolf down their food for nothing, and soon the entire poor bedraggled beast was down the wolf's gullet, and the wolf sat back and sighed contentedly and licked its lips like the most bloated gourmand at an imperial feast. Well, Ivan Tsarevitch by this time had recovered his wits, and realizing his underwear was more than a little damp and stained, got to his feet and ran as fast as his legs would carry him, and there came a terrible from the woods of the wolf. But Tsarevitch did not wait around to find what the wolf wanted, and thankfully for him, the wolf was so heavy with food, it was not about to run after him and bear him down either. Mile after mile after mile he walked, longer than he had ever walked in his entire life, for he was the son of the Tsar and was carried around on cushions and rode on the backs of magnificent horses. He hardly ever walked anywhere. And so soon his feet were blistered and his legs were aching, and he had no real idea where he was except in the depths of the Siberian forest. He hadn't passed a single person to ask or find directions to where anything went up ahead. He saw in the distance the beginnings of a building, and every time he moved around a corner of the path and the trees cleared, he saw a little more and a little more and a little more, and soon there was a great palace there in the depths of the Siberian forests. And as he was approaching the outer walls of this great palace, a voice said from behind him, "There is, my brother, a cage containing the Firebird within this palace. You must open the cage, but do not touch the cage. Merely let the bird hop upon your wrist, and all will be resolved." Tsarevitch looked around him, and he saw no one at first, except the glint of two reflective eyes in the darkness of the forest, and squinting, he looked forward, and then emerging into the weak daylight, there came that great fat wolf, still filled with horse meat. And the wolf said to him, "Brother, I fear I have done you a disservice in eating your horse, but I was so very, very hungry. But do not fear, I have no taste for man flesh. Rather, I seek to fulfill my debt to you with advice, and the advice I have given you is not to touch the cage, but simply let the bird sit upon your wrist and ride away." "Thank you," said Ivan Tsarevitch, as polite as he was to the most dangerous of boyars that he had ever met in his life, for he did not want the wolf's great fangs clamped about his throat should he say the wrong thing and offend the wolf. Through the palace gates he went, expecting guards or servants or someone to come rushing forward, but nobody did. It was as if the place was deserted. And there, in the courtyard clearing, was a great ornate iron arm, and suspended from the iron arm was a great ornate cage of gold, a bird cage of gold. The most fabulous ornate thing he had ever seen, and it's like he'd seen bird cages before. They had them in the palace of his father, but nothing to compare with this. It was a work of artistic mastery, and in that cage sat the Firebird itself. And if the cage was a work of wonder, well, the bird was a work of nature's wonder itself. No human artifice, but something more fabulous still. And for a long while he just stood slack-jawed and watching the beauty of this bird, this creature of majesty. And not only the bird, but the cage. Thinking to himself, how could this possibly be right? And what a wondrous gift this would be to give to his father upon return. But he was mindful of what the wolf had said, and taking the knife from his pocket, he levered up the little bar upon the door of the cage and let it open. And he held up his wrist, and the Firebird hopped a great heavy thing upon his wrist, and the heat coming off the Firebird was quite intense, and he began to wonder that his arm, his wrist, wasn't blistering away under the heat of the bird, but it was not. And he looked half blinded by the light coming off this bird, and thought what a wondrous thing it was still. And then he looked at the cage, and he thought that cage is something beyond measure. It really is. And wouldn't that make a wonderful gift for Father? All of the things that the Tsar of all the Russias had. Oh, so many treasures, and nothing to compare with this. And temptation got the better of him, and the advice of the wolf petered out of his brain. He was only a prince, after all, and you can't expect great intellect from royalty. And so he reached out to take the golden cage, and as soon as his fingers touched the gold, bells began to go off everywhere, loud bells and quiet bells and medium-sounding bells, shrieking and shrilling and clanging and banging all over the place, and at once this seemingly deserted place was filled with guards, armed to the teeth. Great big burly strapping buggers stood there all around him, swords drawn and pointed at him. And there came stomping footsteps as the sound of the bells died down, and out of the palace emerged the most enormous man, almost as wide as he was, tall, dressed in white, with great fur cape around him and fur upon his hat, and great long white beard. The king of the palace emerged and said, "Boy," and the Tsarevitch had never been spoken to in such a tone before, "Boy, had you but asked for the Firebird, I would have happily shared the Firebird with the son of the Tsar of all of the Russias, but you have taken the bird and tried to steal the cage, and for this recompense must be paid. I will allow you to have the bird, but not the cage, if, and only if, you go to my cousin, the king who is deeper into the woods of Siberia, and from him you retrieve the golden horse and bring it to me." Well, what could Ivan Tsarevitch do but agree? He certainly didn't want to be slipped into 1,000 pieces by these heavily armed guardsmen. And so the bird flew back into its cage, and the door was shut. And the young Tsarevitch said, "Certainly, your majesty, I will retrieve the golden horse, if you but give me directions." And the king went back into the palace and returned with a scroll with a map showing the way to the palace of the second king, who lived deeper into the Siberian forests. And somewhat shamefaced, having been caught in an act of stealing, the young man retreated from the palace and looked at the map and thought, what a long trudge this is going to be. "Brother," said the voice from the woods, and there was the wolf again. "You did not listen to me, did you? I heard the bells go off." "No, brother wolf," said Tsarevitch, "I didn't listen. Temptation got the better of me. I was very foolish, and I do apologize," which was the first time the Tsarevitch had ever apologized for anything to anyone in his life. This was proving an adventures of many firsts. "I must go and get this golden horse from the other king who lives deeper into the great forest." The wolf looked at the map, said, "That is a long journey, and you are not used to walking, are you, you podgy thing?" And Ivan had to admit he was not used to walking. "Well," said the wolf, "as I have robbed you of your steed, tasty as it was, I have robbed you of your steed, it is only fit that I should provide you with another one. Get upon my back." And the wolf was an enormously large wolf. And Tsarevitch climbed upon the wolf's back, and off they rode, galloping, if wolves can be said to gallop, deeper and deeper and deeper, mile upon mile upon mile, into the Siberian forest. The snows were everywhere, ladening down the trees of the forest deeper and deeper. They rolled colder and colder. It got until at length, and Ivan had no idea by this time how far they had gone, at length they arrived at the new palace, enormous and vast and ornate, and of a style of architecture that Ivan had never seen before in his life. It was a thing of wonder, a thing of majesty. And the wolf stopped and said, "You must dismount, brother." Ivan got off the wolf's back. "There," said the wolf, pointing his nose, for he had no finger, "there are the stables of the king of the heart of the Siberian forests. There you will find the golden horse in the stable. There is but one golden horse, you cannot mistake it. Now, when you take the horse, do so by placing your hand upon the horse's flesh. Do not, said the wolf, pointing his nose very pointedly, for he had no finger, do not touch the golden bridle that belongs to the horse. Foolish boy. Do not do so. And all will be well. Well, Ivan Tsarevitch crept into the palace, leaving the wolf behind at the forest's edge, deeper and deeper into the palace. And again the place appeared deserted, not a servant, not a guardsman, not a flunky, nobody at all to be seen. And there the stables and the whiff of the horses, and there dozens and dozens of horses, black ones and white ones and roan ones and sable ones, but only one golden one, so gold it looked as if the horse itself had been carved from a block of solid gold, except for the fact that it was moving and whinnying. Oh, it was a beast of such beauty. And Tsarevitch opened the door of the stable and led the horse out, and inside the stall itself, hanging from a great hook, he could see the saddle, the bridle, of which the wolf had spoken, and it too was made of gold. And oh, what a work of beauty and wonder it was, what artistry, what mastery, what skill, what craftsmanship, such that surely his father's heart would melt at a Christmas present beyond all Christmas presents to give him. For all of the gifts that the Tsarevitch of all the Tsar of all the Russias had, nothing could match this saddle, this bridle. And again the words of the wise wolf faded from the silly brain of the blue blood, who reached out a hand and touched the bridle, the saddle, and at once 100 bells went off, loud ones and quiet ones and medium-toned ones, ringing and clanging and clanging and ringing, and suddenly the stables were surrounded by dozens upon dozens of huge, heavily armed men, even huger, if that were possible, than the ones of the previous king, their swords drawn and pointed at him. And then, as the sound of the ringing alarm bells faded, he heard the clump, clump, clump of footsteps, and there came the king. And whereas the first king was huge and wide and fat and broad, this king was as thin as an icicle. And he came and he said, "Oh, foolish boy, had you but asked for the horse, I would have gladly given that horse as a gift to the Tsar of all the Russias for you to take to him. But no. You have to try and steal the horse and steal the bridle and steal the saddle, you silly, silly boy. This is an offence that must be compensated for." And Ivan rolled his eyes and apologized for his greed and his foolishness and his impulsivity. And he said to the second king, "Pray tell me what it is that you require." "Ah," said the second king, "what I would like is an end to my loneliness." "Well," said Ivan, "you're a very nice man, but I don't quite swing that way." And at once the king silenced him. "Not you, you foolish boy. No. What I want is Elena, the most beautiful woman in the world. And she is to be found in the castle 10 miles down the road. I have wooed her all these years, but her father will not relinquish her to me. Go and bring her back to me, and I will give you the horse. Well, well, well. Here is a map, said the king, second-guessing what Ivan was about to say. Take your journey on and return. What to do? It is a long, long walk, said Ivan, looking at the map. Well, you may have loan of the horse, but do not attempt to steal it. If you bring Helena back here, you may keep the horse. If you fail to bring her back, I will have the horse back. And so, taking the golden horse, they rode down the 10-mile stretch, the wolf at the side of the horse galloping along, every so often taking a great sniff of the horse flesh and thinking culinary thoughts, much to the disconcertion of both the horse and its rider. But they came at length to the bizarre and peculiar palace in the heart of the Siberian forest, a great ornate, weird, strange thing of woods, the colours of which had never been seen before by Ivan's eyes, the most bizarre of palaces. And the wolf said, "Your track record for doing as you're told is not good, is it, young prince? This time I shall go into the palace and retrieve Helena and bring her back. You may wait here in the woods with the horse." Well, well. Ivan Tsarevitch was not one to argue this. If somebody else was willing to do the work for him, he was, after all, royal born and used to having everyone do everything for him. So he said, fair enough, I will sit here and you go in and do your wolfy thing. And as he watched, the wolf stood reared upon two paws, the other two held before it, and began to shift and turn and change. And where there was a wolf seconds before, now was a strange man, dressed in a strange livery. Strange though it was, it seemed well matched to the peculiarity of the castle, and into the castle grounds the wolf went. And what happened in there, well, the wolf has not told anyone to this day, but an hour later he returned to the palace, edge to the wall where the forest began, accompanied by the most beautiful woman that young Ivan Tsarevitch had ever seen in his life. This was Helena, the glorious princess of the depths of the Siberian forest. And oh, she was a wonder to behold, witty and charming and funny and talented, and oh, everything you could possibly want in a woman and then some. On to the back of the horse she clambered. On clambered Ivan. The wolf returned to being a wolf, and off they rode back down the road. But they did not ride fast, partly because the poor old horse was knackered after that 10-mile run, but also because Ivan Tsarevitch was enjoying a gentle trot in which he could relish the company of this wondrous woman, as they talked and they talked and they talked and they talked. For Helena had had a lonely life with only the servants and her remarkably grumpy father to keep her company. And this charming young man was a breath of fresh air, a revelation to her. And on that 10-mile ride back to the other palace, well, people died young in those days, and so they didn't wait around. Not only did they die young, they fell in love quickly, time being of the essence. By the end of that journey, Ivan's heart had been moved in a way that it had never been moved before. And Helena's heart had been moved in a way that it had never been moved before. And the thought of being married off to that icicle of a king, whom she had met on the occasions when he had come to her father's palace to try and woo her and charm her and make a good impression upon her father, which she had clearly failed to do, while she had never much taken to him. when they came to the edge of the palace, the wolf could see how heavy-hearted Ivan Tsarevitch was and said, "Ivan, Ivan, Ivan, what is it that ails you?" And Ivan said, "Oh, Elena, Elena, and I've fallen in love, and the thought of parting with her, of seeing her married off to that scrawny-looking king, oh, it breaks my very heart, even though I've only just met her this very day." And the wolf said, "Enough, enough, human, enough. We wolves, when we mate for life. We know the nature of love. I have done you many favours this day, but I will do you another." And as he watched, the wolf got on to two paws. The other two raised up and began to shift and turn and change. And there was the absolute spitting image of Elena, like a carbon copy, a mirror image. The two Elenas stood together, and the wolf, doing a passable impersonation of Elena's voice, said, "You, my dear, stay here, hide in the woods. I will go with your beloved into the castle." And in they went, and there came the scrawny king, the icicle king. And he clamped eyes upon what he thought was Elena, and said, "Oh, my dear, you are wonderful, and you are beautiful, and you are all I could desire." And he couldn't keep his cold little fingers off her. "You, boy, you take the horse, you have done well, take the horse and go." And Ivan Tsarevitch said, "You are happy? You are happy to have this lady I present you?" Yes, said the king, "I'm happy with this lady. Take the horse, in fact, take the bridle, take the saddle, have them as an additional reward, and go. And well, Ivan Tsarevitch didn't wait to be asked twice. He took the horse, he took the saddle, he took the bridle, and off he went into the woods and got the real Elena on the back of his horse, and off they rode as fast as they possibly could until they were out of sight of the palace, and then they slowed down to enjoy the remainder of the journey, chatting and talking and talking and chatting. And they heard in the distance, after several miles of this, and looking back, they saw running towards them the wolf, who had resumed his true shape and legged it before the indignity of the wedding night. And the wolf caught up with them and said, we are but a few miles shy of the next castle, where the Firebird is. Let us go on. And at length they came to the walls of the second castle, and Ivan Tsarevitch was sighing heavily, holding the hand of his beloved awkwardly behind the back on the horse, but sighing heavily. And the wolf, and how wolves put up with humans I do not know, but the wolf said with great patience, "What is it that ails you now, my prince?" Ah, said Prince Ivan, "I have the woman I love more than any woman in the world, but this horse also, oh, what a wonderful beast it is. I've never ridden such a horse. And my father, oh, he would rejoice to see the saddle and the bridle, and oh, wouldn't it be wonderful, wouldn't it be perfect to give this to him as a gift upon Christmas Day? And he will undoubtedly fall as in love with my bride, I hope. She will have me as a husband." And oh, on and on and on he went, until at length the wolf, tiring of all of this adolescent blather, said, "Enough. You want the girl, you want the horse. All is well. I will resolve this for you." And he said to Elena, "You take the horse, the golden horse, and wait in the woods." With a shiver and a shake and a twist, the wolf began to grow and turn and transform and change until he was the spitting image of the golden horse, shy of the saddle, shy of the bridle, but still the golden horse. And in an approximation of a horse's voice, the wolf said, "Lead on, boy, lead on." And Ivan Tsarevitch led the golden horse, or at least what looked like the golden horse, into the palace of the great fat king. And there he waddled down the steps, clapping his pudgy little hands and looking at this marvellous horse, saying, "Oh, I've wanted this horse for ages. I shall ride it round and round and round the palace." To which the poor old horse whinnied in despair at the thought of this enormous thing sitting on his back. But Ivan Tsarevitch handed over the horse, And the fat king said, "You must have the bird, and you must have the cage. Bring, servants, bring forth the Firebird, bring forth the cage. Let this boy take it away. A gift to the Tsar of all of the Russias. May be happy with it." And the boy said, "You are happy with the horse that I give you?" "Oh, I am ecstatic with the horse that you give me. Now go. I want to go and ride it." And so, without another word, Ivan Tsarevitch took the cage with the Firebird in it, radiant and resplendent and hot, and legged it out of the palace to where the real horse and his beloved waited in the woods. And off they ran, and they ran, and they ran, and they ran. Till at length they came within sight of the Tsar's palace. Just a mile or two down the road they could see, and oh, he was filled with nostalgia. He said, "This is the palace of my father, and you see that tower, that's where my room is, that's where we will live together when we are married." And he was filled with stories, and then he noticed just ahead on the road his two brothers idling at an inn. And he said, brothers, look what I have found, the bird and the horse, and oh, look how beautiful and magnificent my bride is. We shall be married, it shall be the most grand and most glorious wedding that has ever been known in all of the Russias." And they got off, and they were hugging and embracing, and all of the while he was so busy gushing, he did not notice the looks that were exchanged between his middle and eldest brother. He said, let us walk a while on foot, give that poor horse a rest. Let us walk a while on foot and talk over your adventures, and we shall toast your bride with some vodka. And they found a quiet spot, and they did exactly that. And when they'd finished making a few toasts and they'd emptied the vodka bottle, the eldest brother took the empty bottle and smashed it over the head of Ivan Tsarevitch, who was laid out cold there. And then, as Elena screamed, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" the two brothers drew their blades, and they stabbed and they stabbed and they stabbed at the prone body of their youngest brother until he looked like a pincushion. And they held the blade to the throat of Elena and said, "You say one word and we will slit you from belly to gizzard. You and the horse and the bird are coming back with us to the palace. For the sake of your own life, keep quiet and tell the story that we tell you to tell." And they buried Ivan in a shallow grave, and off they rode. And on the journey, the sad and heavy journey, sad not only for Elena, who had lost the man she loved, but even the two brothers realized that they had done a dark and terrible thing, but they tried to hide their guilt beneath boasts and brags of all that would lay ahead of them in the future. The eldest said, "I will marry her and keep the Firebird. You," to his younger brother, "you keep the horse and the bridle and the saddle." And this, they agreed, was a good deal. And when they arrived at the palace, they were laughing and cheering and putting on their bravest fronts. They made, at sword point, Elena tell the story of how the three brothers had ridden through to these palaces and rescued her, and of how Ivan sadly, bravely, courageously had fallen to the jaws of a great wolf, and his two older brothers had tried to fight off the wolf, but the poor lad had died from his wounds. And when Elena sobbed before the Tsar of all the Russias, she sobbed quite genuine tears, even though the story was a false one. And so the Tsar of all the Russias was persuaded by the truth of the tears, even if he had a doubt or two about the supposed bravery of his two, frankly, usually quite useless sons. He agreed. Half the kingdom should be settled on the eldest brother for finding the bird that had been stealing the apples, and the other half of the kingdom should be settled upon the middle brother, and a date for the wedding was set between the eldest brother and Elena, who asked to be confined to tower. She said for her own modesty, but of course she wanted to keep away from the murderous brothers and contemplate her fate and wonder what she could do to escape it. And whilst she was locked in the tower for the full month it would take, the cycle of the moon, until the wedding was ready, for royal weddings take a lot of planning. The wolf, who had narrowly escaped being squashed flat whilst in horse shape underneath the posterior of the overweight king, the wolf had reverted to wolf form and fled the palace and wandered the woods, doing what wolves do, enjoying a good howl, until it had got the scent of Ivan Tsarevitch, and it had followed the scent through the woods until it had come within a couple of miles of the palace of the Tsar of all the Russias, and there, under an old hawthorn tree, it had detected a strong aroma, not only of Ivan Tsarevitch, but of blood. And digging into the shallow grave, it unearthed the butchered body of Tsarevitch. The wolf sat and threw back its head and howled and mourned and howled and mourned, until when at length it had finished howling, it looked down and saw a group of crows pecking at the corpse that lay before it. And at once the wolf pounced and flattened 2 young crows beneath its paws, and said to the mother of the crows, the bigger of the 3, "If you wish to see your son and daughter alive beyond this day, I tell you to do 2 things for me. To see your son alive, fetch me a beakful of the waters of death from the well of death." And at once the mother crow flew off, and returned an hour later, its beak filled with the waters of death from the well of death, and sprinkled the waters of death from its beak upon the blooded corpse. And at once the wounds, the fatal wounds that had been hacked into the body of Ivan Tsarevitch, they all healed up. And the wolf lifted one paw off, and one bird flew up into the branches of the tree. "Now," said the wolf, "if you wish me to release your daughter, go and fetch me a beakful of the waters of life from the well of life." And again the mother crow flew off and returned an hour later with a beakful of waters of life, and these she sprinkled over the corpse, and the healed corpse restored immediately to life. And the wolf, true as his promise, let the final bird go free, and 3 of the crows flew away to safety. And Ivan Tsarevitch, wiping the grave soil from his eyes and dusting it from his clothes, stood and dimly began to remember all of the horrors that had befallen him, of how he'd been hacked to death by his very own brothers, and of what must be happening to his beloved, and one thing after another. He poured his heart out to the wolf, and he embraced the wolf and thanked the wolf for all that the beast had done for him. And the wolf said, "There is one last task I can do to help you. Now be upon my back for a final journey." And off they rode down to the palace of the Tsar of all of the Russias, just in time for the wedding. For there was his eldest brother dressed in all of his fineries, and there the middle brother dressed in all of his fineries, leading a golden horse, and the eldest brother with a Firebird perched upon his arm, and there was the quaking, shaking, veiled figure of Helena, and probably most of the people in the crowds, cheering and clapping, thought she was quaking with bridely modesty, but of course she was quaking with something else entirely. And the wolf threw back its head and roared and howled, and the whole crowd parted, screaming, panicking. There was the father, there the 2 brothers, there the bride, and the father's jaw dropped to see his supposedly dead son riding on the back of a wolf, and the 2 brothers saw their supposedly dead brother riding on the back of a wolf, and they screamed and they gibbered, and they fled in opposite directions. Ivan jumped off the back of the wolf, and the wolf took off after the eldest brother, the one that was to marry Helena. And what became of him we cannot say, for he was never seen again. And what became of the middle son we cannot say, for he too was never seen again. But the father, his heart restored, for he had always secretly preferred his youngest son. To have Ivan Tsarevitch restored to him, and the truth of the tale pouring from the lips of his daughter-in-law-to-be and his resurrected son, of how the golden Firebird had been rescued, of how the golden horse had been found, of how the beautiful Helena had been found. Well, A wedding had been planned, a feast prepared, the guests invited, and so a wedding was held, and this time when the bride quaked, it was with joy and anticipation, not with fear. And the golden reign of the new Tsar came to fruition when the old Tsar, in due course, died peacefully in his bed. Thank you.